Welcome to our Toothpick doll basic tutorial today. To get started, you're going to need a few supplies. You'd want to grab some toothpicks, embroidery floss, glue, and scissors. And we're going to begin by cutting our toothpicks. This diagram will show you what you need. Two 2-inch pieces for the legs, two 1-inch pieces for the arms, a body piece of 1 3/8 inch with a line drawn at 3/4 of an inch. Don't worry, if you didn't get that, I will post it on my website, or you're welcome to pause it and take a look at it. So our first step is to take that center body piece, which basically almost just cut off the edges, but that's the 1 3/8 inch. And then I'm going to adhere our legs on. Now that line that you drew at 3/4 of an inch is just a guide as to where you want the tips of your legs to be adhered. So I set that aside to dry and actually had an extra body here. Once I've got it dry, I usually take an emery board and just kind of even up my feet, especially on a doll like this where I'm not doing a full skirt. That way they're just a little more even and makes it easier at the end of the process. And now we're going to jump right into construction. So this particular doll is going to have pink tights. And so I start just putting a little dot of glue on the back of her leg. And then I'm going to adhere down my color of pink tights. So this is a simple doll. And this is really how I kind of got started making dolls, just this easy and simple. And it's a good place to start. This is a great craft for slightly older kids because, as you can see, it's pretty fine detail work. Really little kids might be able to do this with a clothespin instead of toothpicks. But I'm just go on wrapping my leg all the way down, and I want to add boots for her. So I'm just going to use my scissors, add a very fine small dot of glue on the end of my floss, and adhere that to my leg. And now I'm going to repeat that same process on the other side. And for the body and the legs, I am actually using square center toothpicks. But if you've got round toothpicks, I often use cocktail toothpicks, which kind of have some detailing on the end. That's totally fine. The square, I think the idea was that they just generally kind of glue together a little easier because you're using square surfaces versus circular, and so that might help if you're having a little trouble with your doll sticking together. But you don't have to use that. And you'll notice I'm using just really small amounts of glue because if you use too much glue, when you either wrap or adhere down your pieces, the glue can easily kind of ooze up through those fibers and then be on the outside of the doll. And if you touch it when it's wet, this is something I still struggle with, then I can get transfer and little glue dots and kind of this untidy look. So I'm still working on using just the minimal amount of glue that I possibly can, and had a little trouble with that adhesive there. Thinned it out and it's working much better now. And now I'm going to add my skirt. And so just kind of find where I think my waist might be and just wrap around. Now if I wrap this too tight, I'm going to make my legs kind of come together, which if that's what you're looking for, that's totally fine. And on some of the more advanced dolls, I actually do that on purpose. But for this one, I want her legs not to be squished up together, but to kind of have wider stance. I'm just going to go ahead and got my little dot of glue and adhere that down. And now I'm going to add her boots. Again, when I'm starting a wrap, I usually put my dot of glue on my toothpick. And when I'm finishing a wrap, you'll see I actually put the dot of glue on my floss. There's no right or wrong way. It's really what works best for you. But over the years that I've made these, that's how the style I've developed. Not always, but. And you can see here, having a little trouble with my glue, so I'm going to switch over to the bigger bottle which it's a little more free-flowing. And then we're going to go and do the second boot. You can see up close there how the skirt tights and single boot look. And just put in a little bit of glue, and actually might have gotten a little bit too much glue on that one. And I do apologize, I had a lot of trouble staying in frame with this just because it's so up close. And I might do another one for you guys if enough people are interested. So. And then you can see this on there. I got a little too much glue, and my glue is ooging up through the floss there, which I don't like. And what's best to do at that point, you can't really take it off because you've got that tiny wrap. So either I try to not touch it or really just set it aside and come back. I live where it's really dry, and so things tend to dry out really quickly. And I'll admit, patience is not always one of my strong suits with these dolls, but usually if I'm doing one, I kind of have more than one going on at a time, so I can set it aside and let my glue dry. Added a little black belt for her. And then at this point, I added a head. Well, unfortunately, I completely recorded that on the doll I'm working on off camera. I was filming, but I was not on camera. So I've just got another little basic body here with no detail on, but the process is exactly the same. I start mine at the base of the neck and work up, and then just wrap and wrap and wrap. And if you are making this, the head shape can be a real challenge. And you might get some that look a little more cone heady, or not how you're looking. It's just a practice thing. You can totally get there. I tend to make my heads a little more ovalish, but I've definitely seen some people's that are more round, and it's really just a personal preference. There's no right or wrong, and again, just practice. I've made plenty of ugly head shapes. And then a neat, one thing you can do with this, because you'll notice I did not put any glue on the body of the head as I was wrapping it. So I'm going to just come back in with my Aleene's Tacky Glue, put a dot on the outside of the head, and just give it a coat of adhesive of that glue on the outside. I'm going to cover the whole head, and this should just keep it from unraveling or popping off. And once this is dry, you can't tell that it's there. It's fantastic. So back to our doll. She has her head now, same process that you just saw. I just run a different doll. And so I'm going to add her shirt now. And I've decided that I would like a yellow and green striped top for her. So I'm going to go ahead and just do both of my colors at the same time. Process is the exact same whether you're going to do stripes or a solid color or some other pattern. So I just glued my floss to the back and wrap it down. I could have done the belt over this and it probably would have looked a little bit better, but at this point I didn't feel like going back. And then just going to put a little bit of glue on my ends and glue these in. And then next, we're going to work on the arms. I am making these stripes. The arms can be a little bit tricky, so just have patience. When I was first getting started, sometimes I would apply my glue to the points of my arms, let them dry, and then come back and wrap it. If you're having trouble, one of the other tips that I sometimes do is kind of put a longer tail and put it down the arm, and then come back over and wrap over it. And then just make sure that that either goes to the back or between the arm and the body. But just a little bit of patience. And so I'm doing this exact same way. I've adhered both of my colors. I'm just wrapping down my arms. And then if you have just cut those, again, those are about 1 inch. And these are not hard and fast measurements, but this is just a starting point. Most of mine are made on these, this particular measurements, but it's up to you. I've made some a little shorter, some a little taller. And now we're going to go back to the other arm. And these I actually used round center toothpicks just because it was what I had on hand. And I don't think it takes anything away having two different shapes of toothpicks on here. I am finding I go to those cocktail toothpicks a little more often. I feel like they're just a little bit nicer. I don't have splintering or breaking when I cut things with those. So just wrapping the arm. And then going to just kind of make sure they're relatively close. Trim off. And I want to take just a minute to talk about having scissors. You're working with such a small craft here, and generally, like if you watch how I'm using my hands when I'm not off camera, I'm holding the ends with one hand and applying glue with another. And so you want to have good sharp scissors that are good at cutting floss, because that'll just make your life a lot easier. And then put a healthy dab of glue on the tops of my arms and glue those in place. And then I'm going to set her aside and let her dry. And I do this often. I put a little toothpick piece under her arms just so they're not kind of trailing behind her. You totally don't have to do it. It's just what I do. So now we're going to add shoulders. I'm just going to apply my floss to the back, and then I'm going to wrap around. If you want to get super detailed, I didn't worry too much about matching up my stripes because I figured they were pretty close with that. And you don't have to do shoulders. Just the basic doll usually does. And then we've got, once we're at this point, then it is time to start with the hair. And the hair can be so much fun. I am going to make curly hair for this. So I take a round, in this case, toothpick, and then I'm going to wrap my floss around. I oftentimes actually do this right by this thing, because once I've got it wrapped, then I run my toothpick with floss wrapped in water. And then that does need to sit and dry completely. It usually takes overnight or a few hours to get that to dry. But then once you've got it dry, so here I've got 3, and I'm going to start working on her hair. And you see, you can't tell that her head has glue on it. So I'm going to go ahead and gently work this off. Now, if I just pulled from the far end, I could stretch that curl out, which if that's what you're looking for, is totally fine. But I wanted to show you guys how tight these curls can come off the toothpicks. So I am stretching them out a little bit. And I'm going to start, I wanted her to have straight bangs. So just put my little glue on the front. And one thing that helps me to think about, you don't have to have the piece the size that it'll be finished with. If, for example, on these bangs, I'm applying glue at the base of the hair of the bang and then trim it. Then once that's dry, or mostly dry in my case, I can come back in and shorten that up. The same for the hair in the back and kind of some different things that you've maybe seen in some of my dolls. If cutting that teeny tiny little piece is too hard, you can do what I just did there, which is kind of a U piece. So I am starting on the left hand side of the face and wrapping a single strand to the right hand side of the face. This also covers the ends that I created on those first ones. And with hair, I like a lot of hair on my dolls. I like big hair on my dolls, so I oftentimes will kind of work in stages, get a base layer of hair done, and come back and add some more. So you can see just applying bangs to my doll, and obviously they're long, but once she's dry, I can trim those as short as I would like. And so now I'm going to apply my curls. And if you've ever cut curly hair or worked with round things, when working with the long piece, when you cut it, it is going to kind of bounce back up and be shorter than where you cut. Just takes a little bit of practice, and certainly made a mistake and cut something too short, but it's a little doll. These are fun. Shouldn't be too much stress. And trimmed off the ends. Sometimes those can get a little ratty depending on how they were adhered down on your toothpick. I'm just going to start laying in my hair, and again, making it a little longer than I'm thinking I want it. And I'm actually going to do a technique to this once after I get it glued down that normally I would do beforehand. But for her, once I got her hair down, I just wasn't loving it. I felt like it was too tightly curled, just kind of for the look of the doll, because she was kind of modern, and these sort of look like what they call sausage curls, kind of those tight curls, and I didn't love it. So once I get her hair on, I'm actually going to just give it a very light spritz with water, which allows, it actually will relax the curl and stretch it out. And I do that on the doll, which is something I normally don't do because you don't have a ton of control over it, but I was really happy with how it turned out. So while just keep going with laying down my hair. And you can see I'm kind of stretching my curl out over the top of the crown and trimming it. And again, you could make as much hair as you want. So here you can see I've got her hair pretty much done. And I'm just coming in and trimming off a couple little ends. And you wouldn't want to apply too much water to the head, especially since if you've still got wet glue or anything like that, because it could absolutely make her head pop off or hair fall off or cause problems. But again, a little bit of practice and patience go a really long way with this little craft. So here she is, and then I give her just a little bit of spritz of water. And it actually, you can see I'm kind of working it with my toothpick there to stretch it out, but I didn't even really have to do that. It kind of just automatically does that once you hit it with the water. And these curls are pretty much permanent. I have dolls that are over 25 years old that have curly hair that still have curly hair today. So it's kind of a neat, fun thing. And there she is with her slightly longer, slightly less curled hair. I took a small little wooden circle and just gave it a coat of paint and glued her on it with just a small amount of Aleene's tacky glue. You don't have to do that, but I knew I wanted her to stand up. And that is it. So this is how I started making these, and then they eventually went to more complicated dolls with more complicated features. And so certainly starting here, she's super fun to make. I hope that this inspires you to get started making your own toothpick dolls. Thanks so much for watching today. Have a great day.